We're good. So,
Hi.
hi, how are you? I thank you very much for coming and talking to my students virtually through the wonders of Zoom technology. Um, but I would like to welcome you, Dana Saylor, and let you introduce yourself, and then we can kind of go from there.
Great. Thanks, John. This has been really exciting to hear about your class and the way that urban sketching has been burgeoning across the region. Um, I am an artist who was trained in fine art at SUNY Oswego. So I went to school for this. Um, and I graduated from SUNY Oswego with a BFA in studio art back in 2001. And I lived in Utica, New York for 8 years. And I moved to Buffalo, New York in 2008. So it's been 12 years that I've been here in Buffalo. And urban sketching is something that I came upon as a form once I moved to Buffalo. I was in a bookstore and I picked up the Urban Sketchers book by Gabby Campanario, who is the founder of Urban Sketchers International. That really, I was already returning to my fine art roots. I was drawing and sketching buildings with painting for preservation. P for P, as it was called, was run by Sarah Zach. There it is. Yeah. And Sarah Zach founded Painting for Preservation, and a lot of the artists that I met through that continued on in Urban Sketchers. But Painting for Preservation was focused specifically on at-risk buildings or buildings that were sort of unloved or forgotten. And Sarah had a real gift at, and still does have a real gift at, capturing the beauty in both decay and in sort of interstitial spaces, places between places. She would often focus her sort of somewhat abstract oil paintings on the dumpsters along the side of a historic building, and what zoomed in view of that would look really interesting. And I always really appreciated the way that she had this unique perspective, because she would sort of try to say, like, there's beauty in everything. So that inspired me a lot. And that group existed for 5 years, 7 years, something like that. And I honed a lot of my urban sketching skills in that group and sort of knew what it was like to sketch and draw with a group of people. And it was just, the camaraderie was awesome. That's a part of what I really have missed this year. But I began to follow the work of Urban Sketchers International more seriously after I didn't have that group anymore. And eventually I came around to wanting to form a chapter here in Western New York. There are a couple of plein air art groups, one in the Falls, one in East Aurora, and they don't necessarily focus on the city. And so I thought there was still a niche for urban sketching that was specific and dedicated to that. And Urban Sketchers, International, the manifesto involves drawing the world around you as you see it, not drawing imaginary things, not drawing things virtually. So trying to draw what you actually see around you, and that can include interiors, and it can include people. It doesn't necessarily have to only be architecture, which is, I liked the open-endedness of it. So I decided to form a chapter, and that was 3 years ago. And so we are a chapter of Urban Sketchers International, is Urban Sketchers Buffalo. I could have called it Urban Sketchers Buffalo Niagara, or Urban Sketchers Western New York. All the other chapters across upstate New York use the name of the main city that they're based in, Rochester, Syracuse, et cetera. I just decided, for the sake of a simple name, to keep it Buffalo. But we met, and that's how John and I met, was doing urban sketching sketch meets. And Urban Sketchers International puts out an amazing monthly newsletter that I follow, and I'm one of the admins. So I get, the emails from the international organization, which kind of keeps me posted on what they're doing. And my experiences in this have really, the camaraderie of continuing to make art in urban settings has been really, really beautiful. So.
Yeah, I think the sketch meet at the Japanese Gardens in Buffalo was the first one that I attended in 2018. So I picked
Right.
it up a little bit after that.
Hmm.
But gotten back into sketching probably in 2017 after like 20 years of kind of just letting it lay fallow for a while. So it was nice. I enjoyed it. And yeah, I definitely miss sort of the ability to sort of connect with people in it. The community was a nice piece of the last few years of getting to go and even host one of the sessions. How has, before we kind of get into your perspectives on urban sketching, one of the challenges my class and I have been having is sort of, being able to get out is challenging in this day and time. And, so some of them have had, have to deal with quarantine, some of it had to deal with other things. So we've been having to mix up a little bit of the virtual and the urban sketching. So how has that transition been for you?
Well, that's been the trickiest aspect of this year because there are options. Like the chapters around the world, I'm hearing from them, and what they're doing is something similar. They're mixing the virtual with the in-person, depending on how many people are allowed to gather. They're trying to be really cautious. Sometimes they're only encouraging people who already are in like a pod, quasi pod with each other to go together. Um, there were two reasons that Urban Sketchers Buffalo basically stopped at the beginning of the season. First reason was I was sort of paralyzed with fear and didn't want to be a part of something that caused people to get sick. So we didn't have any in-person meetings, obviously, because we were all in lockdown. But after that, it might have been possible for me to institute some virtual meetups because people are doing like, draw the view of this or that, where everybody just goes individually and draws. But my income and livelihood and all these other things and my energy level, like just what I could commit my energy to, was so limited that I had to pick and choose very carefully. And I love urban sketching and it renews me and the camaraderie is awesome and I always enjoy it. And it just unfortunately had to get cut from the roster of things I could give my attention to because I knew how complicated just like a single social meetup with friends was. The idea of how we could do like this week we're doing virtual, next week we're doing live in person, next week we're doing this. And I think that just was overwhelming to me. And, that's okay. Like, as the leader of an organization, sometimes you have to say, I'm going to do what's best for my own mental health, although I miss it terribly. So it's something that I'm, I think as we go into winter, I may relent.
I understand. The Sketchamo de Casa with the Trieste Sketchers, at the beginning of this, I got a chance to participate in that for a little while. And it was kind of a nice thing, but at the same time, that energy, that need for self-care, I think is important. So I completely support your decisions on all of that stuff. I understand.
Yeah.
What are some of your perspectives on like urban sketching? And obviously you have a career and other things that sort of tie into some of this stuff, but like what are your perspectives now that you've been doing this for a little while?
So I have been, since I moved to Buffalo in 2008, an architectural historian. I was a genealogist, researching my own family history and that of friends before I moved to Buffalo. That was my introduction to the world of historical research. And Buffalo turned me into an architectural historian because it has such an amazing, intact historic architecture, and all of Western New York, really. So that experience began to introduce me to the world also of historic preservation and why we should save places and their stories. And I learned a great deal about that just by doing it, by being surrounded by other preservationists in Buffalo. And painting for preservation sort of brought me into that world also. So I was sort of like had these dual tracks of being an artist and being a historian preservationist. So they were developing side by side. And so my interest as a historian and historic preservationist is paralleled by my interest in the art itself. So I find that they both complement each other really well, and that I was asked to be an advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation back in 2013. So I've been with them for that long, and they wanted someone like me because I am not someone who's trained in historic preservation. So that's kind of like I have this outsider perspective, which is also sort of an interesting thing, because I think that a lot of us who, if somebody lives in the country and comes into the city to draw, or if they, do the reverse, or just the ways in which urban sketching can let you experience a different world for a short while is really attractive. Um, Even if you're just like depicting a bridge, or, like going out into a place that you wouldn't normally be. And maybe, people on the street see you drawing and they interact with you, or they ask you questions or whatever. You get to stare at Niagara Falls for a little while in a way that you might not usually, because you're drawing it. There's just all these different ways that, I really appreciate noticing details. And that's a part of why I like research and history. And it's part of why I like historic buildings. So, you bring those things together and it's just like perfect.
Yeah, I understand. I was a history major myself, so I have some of that background. And I have some old sketches from my travels abroad back in the late 90s. So it kind of goes back a ways for me. Although at the time I didn't know what that was called, since
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
What can you share any like interesting experiences that you had while urban sketching? Or I mean, you mentioned
Hmm.
stopping by, or you've hosted events with many people, but are there any things that come to mind when you sort of think about when you were on the spot urban sketching, or other things that you might have had?
I really have enjoyed the times when out urban sketching, like, well, when I was with the group Painting for Preservation, a lot of times they were very community oriented. And Sarah Zach, the organizer, would really try to reach out in advance to people in the community. And so there would be like people who would visit, and sometimes with that group, there was a mix of photographers, poets, musicians. So I remember standing in front of the Wilkeson House on Busty Avenue, and that's now torn down. But that building was amazing, and it was the home of Colonel Samuel Wilkeson, whose father lived on Niagara Square, where City Hall is now built. And so we were there trying to sort of mark the importance of this building before it got torn down, because we knew what was going to happen. It was cold. It was March. I think it was our opening sketch meet. We didn't call them that. We called them, what did we call them? I don't remember. But we were there, and a friend of Sarah Zach's showed up, and she played Civil War violin music while we were sketching in front of the house. And it was just sort of like mournful and beautiful, and kind of, it was sort of, like I said, that moment that brings together the importance of historic preservation, the meaning of a place through time, and the way the artist can capture it. It still kind of gives me goosebumps to think about that. And then also other times when just kids in a neighborhood would walk up and be like, "What are you doing? Why are you here? Why are you drawing that building?" And helping to explain to kids that buildings and places have the stories of people and the stories of time in them, and that makes them meaningful and worth noticing, capturing, memorializing.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely an experience unlike any other. Like, you can't get the same thing from just taking a picture, and you can't get it from just drawing a picture at home. It definitely includes the sort of whole package, so to speak. And I recall, like, just when we were down doing the sketching in the Hyatt in Buffalo when it was pouring rain, and we were there, and my son came, so I had limited time before his sort of attention span sort of divided. But he was doing sketches of all these little tiny little things and details, and I was doing the bigger sketch. And it was just kind of a fun experience to be a part of that. And it's not just one generation in some of these cases, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
What are, like, I've seen some of your work, but what are some of the techniques you like to use when you're urban sketching, or some of your tools or other things that you always are drawn to when you're doing urban sketching?
I tend to be either a pen and ink person or a watercolor person. When I first started urban sketching, doing painting for preservation, I was not skilled in drawing architecture. I did not know the first thing about drawing architecture. And I just want to express to the kids in your class that it's possible to go from somebody who makes some art but doesn't actually know how to draw buildings to someone who gets paid to draw buildings in less than 6 years. Just saying, that's a cool thing. And people will pay decent money for a really cool picture of their house, especially if it's really like an innovative style. So I started with Sharpie. I meant to say that because I needed to find a way to draw with something that didn't feel precious to me. Like I wasn't, like wasting or using something that was an expensive material because I wasn't so sure about my skills, but Sharpie forced me to make a mark I couldn't take back. So that's what I started with. And then as I got more comfortable, I went back into pen and ink and watercolor because they're highly portable. I used to only own a bicycle. And so all of my artwork was made like 9x12 or smaller and able to be put into a bicycle pannier. So everything I worked with was quite small. And I always was envious of the plein air artists who had like a whole setup that they pulled out of the trunk of their car, with an easel and a chair and water bottle and all this stuff. And that was never my ability. I just had to be more portable than that. So I think that, flexibility is something that you learn and you get a system, and a setup that you like. Pen and ink I like because it is quick to use and bold, and you can use different variations in width of the pens. By doing hashing, you can make shading pretty quickly. And it looks kind of traditional, which I like. Watercolor, you can be as abstract or as realistic as you want to be. And watercolor dries quickly, especially in the hot summer sun. So.
Yeah, I'm much more of a pen and ink person myself. So I do the watercolor, but I always am thinking through it as I go. So it's always a challenge. What are now, many of my students have never even heard of urban sketching before. Some of them have started posting a couple of their sketches online. We're going to be doing an urban sketching like sort of exhibition at the end of the class. And I've just seen a lot of changes over the class from, originally kind of what they could draw to what they can draw now. And it's been kind of exciting to sort of see that challenge. And how they've evolved over the time, despite all the challenges of having to do some of this virtually. What are any tips or recommendations you might have for someone that's new to urban sketching?
I would say, first of all, remember that Urban Sketching International and all the chapters that you might encounter and the classes that you take, it's all about learning. I think everybody who does urban sketching does it because they find it interesting, but also because they love to learn. Like it's such a great process to, this is why it's so great to draw with people, is because you can look over their shoulder and you can say, oh, wow, that's so cool. How you did that is so interesting. Everybody has a different approach. You can learn techniques. You can learn approaches. You can learn like the ways that some people like frame or, constrain their drawings. I think that the learning that you can do with others, even if it has to be virtual and you simply see what they drew at the end, that's such a great opportunity. And I would let you guys know that, what's very cool is that Urban Sketchers International and the local chapters frequently hold symposia. So you can travel to an international city every year for the symposium, and you can learn from experts in urban sketching about their particular area of skill, whether it's about, how to pick a subject matter, how to draw people who are moving, how to, work in a specific medium. And I went to the Urban Sketchers Chicago symposium a couple of years ago, and that was fantastic because it was just everybody there loves going and drawing places, but they love learning together too. And so, it was just like a celebration of learning, and it was really fun. And I was really challenged technically by a couple of the teachers. They were tough, and they were like, draw this in 5 minutes. Now draw it in 2 minutes. Now draw it in 30 seconds. And there were just all these really fun challenges that I feel like, in an atmosphere where everybody is is there to learn and have a great experience, it's just really fun. It's a lot of great camaraderie. So I would encourage your students to continue to think about it as like, nobody's perfect. If you look at some of the people that get published in the Urban Sketchers books, some of them I feel like are highly technically skilled, and others are just really enthusiastic, and they just have great energy and they really love what they're doing. And their drawings are maybe not actually that representational. Maybe they're not that realistic, but it's about the energy and enthusiasm they have for what they're doing. Because a lot of urban sketching is about community.
Yeah, and I think as of today, there's 261 members in the Urban Sketchers Buffalo Facebook group. So
yeah,
definitely nice community. Trying to think of, are there other questions that you have or things that you want to, talk about more that I haven't necessarily asked?
I think that mostly I just want to remind anyone who is trying to learn some urban sketching is to keep the joy about it, because to keep it light, even though you might feel some pressure as you work on something and you might compare yourself to others and you might think, well, this is going to be in an exhibition, it has to be really good. Just to try to do it with joy and to try to remember that you are a historian of a sort. You're capturing something of meaning at a place and time. And this year has been particularly historic. So it's a pretty cool time to be an urban sketcher. And I'm just really excited to see what your students make.
Yeah, me too. I'm impressed by what they've done so far. So should be good. But I just want to say thank you very much for coming out and talking with me. And, I look forward to more collaborations and other things in the future. And thank you very much.
Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
See you later.